Hi, I'm Natalie Phillips-Mason, and this is the Open Wired podcast. Through respectful curiosity, we have candid conversations that explore human diversity and how to create inclusive ecosystems for all minds, bodies, and identities. My guests are change makers who are doing the practical, sometimes unglamorous work to make inclusion real. In case we haven't met, I'm Natalie, founder of Inclusive Change. I champion human talent with a neurodiversity lens, using my background in organisational change management to help organisations value and normalise human differences. We have a strong focus on sensory-friendly working, and sensory friendliness will come into almost every conversation we talk about. My guests today are Lisa Cox and Paul Nunnari, two powerhouse disability advocates and members of the world's largest minority. They are people with disability. Paul and Lisa share why seeing someone like themselves in the media, be it in advertising, TV or film, is so powerful. But this is not just a conversation for good. There is a real commercial imperative here. Businesses lose out when accessibility and disability inclusion is ignored. Open Wired is recorded on the land of the Bunurong people. We acknowledge the richness and diversity of Indigenous communities and the wisdom of storytelling that has been passed down from generation to generation. We pay our respects to elders past and present. Open Wired conversations are for interest only. A reminder that we do not provide medical or clinical advice, medical assessments or diagnoses, legal or employee relations advice. Please consult with a qualified healthcare provider or other relevant professional for specific concerns related to your mental health or any medical conditions. And just a quick heads up before we dive in, our audio gremlins were out in full force for this recording, but the conversation is too good not to share, so please forgive the slightly wonky sound quality today. If you do need a transcript, that will be available via Apple Podcast. So technical hiccups aside, let's dive right into what really matters, and that's the conversation. Here's my chat with Lisa and Paul. I've got two guests today, Lisa Cox. So Lisa is a media professional, author and TEDx speaker. She is an internationally awarded thought leader and currently doing a PhD around the world's most powerful and influential industries, which is advertising and media. Lisa, welcome to the conversation today.
Hi, Natalie. Thank you very much. Great to be here.
And Paul Nunnari, who is the CEO of Inclusively Made, which provides a certification framework for film, television and advertising. Inclusively Made certification ensures that the production has met its commitment to being authentically inclusive, sets a benchmark to supporting dignified outcomes and equitable outcomes for people with disability. So hi, Paul, and welcome.
Hi, Natalie. Great to be here.
So, Lisa, I thought I'd start with you. Can you share with us what you, your friends or your colleagues have experienced when it comes to advertising and media inequity for people with disability? And how have you used your voice to advocate for change?
Sure. So to give a really brief summary, I worked in advertising agencies for years, studied advertising. And then I acquired multiple visible and invisible disabilities over 2 decades ago. I've since combined professional background and lived experience to work with industries, business, brands, government around inclusion, disability inclusion. One, because I'm a passionate disability advocate and I want to see us everywhere. But two, because I used to be that able-bodied writer in the creative department going, how do I do this? I don't want to offend anyone. I want to get it right. So knowing where everybody is coming from in terms of when advertisers come to me and have that terrified look in their eyes, I can understand that side of things, wanting to get it right and wanting to say the right thing, but having no guidebook or somebody to really hold their hands to navigate the nuances of disability. And that's why I love Inclusively Made, because they do just that. They help brands and businesses with here's how you do it. It can be a scary space. It shouldn't be, but let's be realistic. It is. So that's a little bit of my background. And I'm an advocate as well, but more from the point of a solutions-focused approach whereby I don't just want to keep talking about problems because we know there's a lot of them, but creating solutions and elevating those who are already doing an awesome job and creating solutions as well, like Paul and Inclusively Made.
So it's a really nice link into Paul. And before, Paul, we go to you, I just wanted to ask you, Lisa, why you think it is such a scary area. Why are people so worried about disability representation, or is it because people are worried about doing the wrong thing? Is it because we've got not the right or not accurate understanding of disability?
All of the above. There are some examples where people have, with the best intentions, tried to be inclusive, but it's just come up as tokenistic and commercializing disability, all sorts of things. But often there's no co-design with the disability community, so it's a bunch of able-bodied people sitting around a desk thinking, this is how we best talk about disability. And there's no, what's what I'm looking for, no collaboration with the disability community. So it really comes off as incredibly tokenistic. But it can be a little bit scary as well because, and I'll use a really, really recent example. The best example I can think of, Autistic Barbie by Mattel. From what I could see, Mattel did all of the right things. They consulted with the disability community and disability organizations. They made Autistic Barbie authentic and intersectional as well. So Wheelchair Barbie got criticized for being a blue-eyed blonde in a wheelchair. But this Barbie had darker skin. She was intersectional, tick, tick, tick. But if you ever wanted proof that the neurodivergent and disability community is not a monolith, this is a great example because there's a lot of people who either hated it or loved it, but a lot of backlash. And I think brands can be afraid of that backlash as well, which is another reason they don't go ahead with it.
Thanks, Lisa. So, Paul, that is a very nice segue into Inclusively Made. So you've had some really big wins. I saw that there were 2 episodes of Bluey that have the Inclusively Made tick. Can you share with us the process it takes for a brand to get that tick with you and the outcomes that you've seen for people with disability and the brand and the production teams when they go through that process?
Yeah, no worries at all, Natalie. I just want to say thank you to Lisa for always being so kind in her support and endorsement of us. I just want to just preface as well, just going back to the conversation you both had, a lot of feedback we have from organisations or brands that we work with is there's probably 3. I don't want to get it wrong. They don't want to do the wrong thing and they don't want to be tokenistic. And that you've covered that beautifully in your conversation. And that's exactly the feedback that we get as well. So with the certification, it actually means that the brands don't get it wrong. It's not tokenistic. And more importantly, it builds confidence in those brands and those CMOs who are leading that work on how to collaborate, how to bring people with disability into the conversation from the ideation, and then ensure that the end outcomes also align with connection to the disability and broader audience as well. We work to 8 pillars of inclusion across the certification framework. Across those 8 pillars, the production has to garner a minimum of 100 points. It could be around concept development, it could be around casting, it could be around auditions, it could be around broadcast, it could be around mentoring opportunities, locations. I guess every touch point and interface from start to finish of that production has to consider some type of disability / and inclusion considerations. The biggest probably 3 for me is definitely from that concept development. I think having a person with disability at the table is really important because it really brings in that good perspective. And to Lisa's point, disability is so individual and that's totally fine. No 2 disabilities are alike or no 2 people with the same disability have the same perspective. But I think at least bringing in one perspective is really important as part of that conversation moving forward and the way, those ideas come to fruition. The other point I want to make as well is you don't have to have a person with disability in front of the camera or in the catalogue or on screen. It's also about ensuring that there's representation behind camera. We have it depends on what surveys you go to, but let's just say on average around people with disability make up about 20% of the population globally. On screen, it's generally around 3 to 5%, say, at the most, 3 to 8% at the most. So it's very much below what we see in every day, and that's across both visible and non-visible disability. So when I talk about non-visible disability, someone who might have a sensory disability, blind, low vision, someone who might be little d, capital D deaf, someone who might identify as neurodiverse, and then someone obviously with a visible disability like myself. But it's ensuring that we get that balance right across both of those cohorts. But behind camera, it's around 1% representation behind camera. So I think that's really important because if you've got that representation behind camera, it also builds confidence and knowledge across crew and producers and directors and writers. And that's really important as well, that they get that perspective and that connection because not everyone is connected to disability. And I don't think representation traditionally has come from a bad place. I think sometimes it's definitely come from a medical model perspective where disability being used as a way to maybe elicit sympathy or elicit someone overcoming something so profound, and that's been coined as a bit of inspirational porn. So that's where I think a lot of, fast forward to 2026 rather, there's been a lot of, I guess, anxiety or uncertainty around brands or productions having more representation because they understand that community perceptions and, I guess, expectations have changed in regards to how disability is represented. And so they want to get that right. And I think there's been some amazing outcomes that we've worked with and amazing outcomes that we haven't worked with. One TV series I really want to just draw attention to, and I know we're talking about brands and I can come to the brands as well, but this would apply to brands, is Breaking Bad starred RJ Mitty, who's an actor with cerebral palsy. And the producers of that series didn't actually want a person with disability in the context of showcasing disability. They wanted disability representation because they felt like it added value to the story arc and to the storyline and to the character and the interactions. And that's exactly what it did. Not for one iota during that, 6 seasons, was there a focus on these characters' disability. It was about how he navigated his life with his disability just a secondhand in the broader context of the storyline. And I thought that was excellent. I think that's been really the benchmark moving forward.
So do you think then that there is progress being made around not only inclusive representation, because I think disability representation is one aspect, but if we think about broader society, do you feel like there's adequate progress being made into inclusive practice and into equity, be it employment, be it representation, be it any other aspects?
We are seeing a lot more diversity across the board, even gender. So if we look at car advertising, back in the 40s and 50s, the woman always sat in the passenger seat. She never spoke. She just smiled and looked pretty. Even Barbie, when Barbie was diverse, the only diverse thing about her was the frills on her apron or the baking tin she held. When we moved to the 80s, again, it wasn't perfect, but the women were only sex symbols to be draped over cars, and that was the role of women. In the 2000s, when I was running car advertising, we had come to realize that, you know what? Women are actually the decision makers and often the ones who control the purse strings, so to speak. So we started writing women into car advertising. Suddenly women were the drivers. They weren't just the passive passengers. They had all of these really great roles. That to me gives me a little bit of comfort knowing that gender equality started out really bad. It's certainly not perfect now. The long way to go from an advertising perspective, it's come a long way. So every time I get disheartened by how little is happening with disability and inclusive advertising, I think of examples like that. Over 2 decades ago, when I was sitting in an advertising agency, having acquired my disabilities, there were no people on TV. Only last night, my husband paused an advertisement. There's a wheelchair, and because my sight is not very good, I had to get up close, but it was incidental. And the fact that I didn't even notice, not because of my terrible eyesight, that was great. That's what we should aim for, is that really incidental and seamless disability inclusion, because we're trying to normalise what is a very normal part of society.
I acquired my disability at a very young age. I've been around for a while now and with this lens, and I definitely, hand on heart, feel like there has been a definite increase in authentic representation of people with disability. I feel like definitely sometimes you see something brilliant and then sometimes you see something like, where did that come from? So there's maybe been a bit of a misstep, but definitely I feel like there's definitely been a corner turned in how people with disability are represented, whether it's on a small screen, large screen, or in brands and marketing. And one corner I think that has turned has been traditionally, you know, at the Academy Awards, you'd have Tom Cruise or Daniel Day-Lewis or some other actor playing the role of a disabled person, right? And they were playing that role so well, and they were getting Oscar nominations for those roles. What I think has happened is that there's definitely been a concerted effort by studios, at least, to cast people with disability in disability roles. And I think that has been awesome because when I was growing up, I never saw myself reflected in any content that I saw. And at that stage, there was no social media, but definitely when I went to watch a film or sit down at home and watch something on TV, there was always an actor playing the role of the wheelchair user. And for a young boy who's a wheelchair user, who was like, really loved his life, the wheelchair wasn't a negative in my life, it was a positive. I never saw that attitude reflected in the content that I was viewing. It was always about the negative. So what I think we're seeing now is roles being authentically cast, which in itself provides an opportunity for that actor with disability to put themselves into that role. That role, in my experience at least, is always relevant to modern day and around that social model of disability where the disability isn't the barrier. It's about those attitudinal barriers or those institutional communication barriers that we face sometimes day to day that perpetuate disability and it's not the personal disability themselves. And I think that's really important.
Lisa, I guess my question to you is how do you tell when an organisation's performative rather than genuine in their disability representations? And if brands are really looking to have genuine and authentic co-design with people with disability, how does that process start and where do they start? Where do they go for that?
Well, nothing about it's without us is really the core of all disability inclusion. And one of the hallmarks of really bad disability inclusion is when it's just not consistent. So we'll see this around the Paralympic Games. A few brands get on board and there'll be a disabled person in an advertisement and they're all drips away after the Games is finished. And there's research to support this globally. But we'll also see the same thing happening on International Day of People with Disability. There's a few brands who will jump on board for the day and then nothing for the rest of the year. But my disability doesn't just occur every 4 years when the Games are on or just happen on December 3rd for International Day of People with Disability. Just like all disabilities, neurodivergence, chronic illness, every year. And we are, as Paul said, roughly 20% of the community. And it doesn't begin to include neurodivergence, chronic illness, and those sorts of things. So we're the world's largest minority, yet our representation is sporadic and it shouldn't be like that. We need to be represented at the same or similar rates that we actually occur in society.
I guess coming back to the certification and the work that's at the core of Inclusively Made, where brands do want to ensure that they are working genuinely with the disability community, I guess there's a great framework there to understand how that works. And I wholly support, Lisa, what you're saying. I think days of events of significance are great for raising awareness and having a conversation, but it's certainly not a one conversation that just happens once a year. I guess, Paul, I wanted to come back to you. I've got Inclusive Change is doing a lot of work around inclusive retail. And so it would be remiss of me to not ask you what are some of the barriers that you may or may not face or people with disability may face when it comes to shopping and physical retail? Are we getting better in that space? My personal opinion is that there's still a long way to go and there's huge opportunities. And we look at neuro-inclusion, but certainly from an inclusion, broadly inclusive perspective, I'd be really interested in your perspective around how easy that is to navigate for you and what you wish that brands considered possibly doing differently.
Yeah, I think that's a really great question in the context of we interact in a shopping environment pretty much every day, whether it's going to Woolies or Coles or Big W or so forth. For me personally, from a physical disability perspective, I actually think if a shopping centre or a store isn't wheelchair accessible, it's kind of more an exception to the rule than consistently being an issue. So I think that's great. And I think in Australia, at least, I feel very lucky and blessed that we live in a country that actually care about people with disability in the context of ensuring that, at least from a physical perspective, we're building infrastructure that supports mobility access, ramps, toilets, and elevators, whether that's ensuring that there's extra circulation space, so power chairs or paths of travel are a bit wider and so forth. I think all the fundamentals are in place, and I think then it comes down to individual stores or centres on how they might go next level. And to your point, Natalie, around people who identify as neurodivergent, I've done some work with Autism Spectrum Australia. So we've worked with a number of shopping centres on highlighting where those high sensory spaces might be in the centre. Or I know during COVID, one of the dividends was that Woolies and Coles identified like a quiet hour and things like that to ensure that there was opportunities there for that cohort to go in, where the lights were dim, where the music was off, and it was just a little bit more calm and not as confrontational. And I think I always make the case that accessibility ultimately benefits everyone, like 20% of the population, right? But ultimately it benefits everyone. When I was getting off the train station today, I was only on the wheelchair user in the elevator, but there was someone the pram, there was someone with luggage, there was someone who just maybe had a sore toe. Ultimately, accessibility benefits everyone. So I think most retailers get that. And I think to Lisa's point, there's a commercial imperative as well. 1 in 5 is significant, and that's a significant commercial spend. And so if I was made the case that we know for a fact that for every one person with disability, they're generally represented by 4 other people. And if I physically can't get into a space, say for a cafe, then that's not just a coffee and a sandwich spend that cafe is missing out on. It's that coffee and spend times 4 or 5. So can a retailer afford not to be accessible and inclusive? The answer would be no. That spending just compounds across every inclusive and accessible interface that people come into contact with.
100% agree. And I think that commercial imperative, I mean, they do this really well in the UK. They've got the purple pound, so they've put some actual...
$18 billion a year, Natalie.
There you go.
Spend on the purple pound.
There you go. Yep, I'm with you. Absolutely. Lisa, I just wanted to ask you the same question, but I also wanted to include, because I know that you also have a focus when it comes to neuroinclusion and neurodivergence as well, and I wanted to ask the same question that I asked Paul, how you find navigating physical retail.
Similar to Paul, I agree that generally speaking, physical retail is doing a good job. Unfortunately, though, I do find the odd place that's not accessible. And again, further to Paul, it's not just my coffee and sandwich that you're missing out on. It's my husband, sister, family. We went out to lunch yesterday to celebrate Dad's birthday, and there were 10 of us. So had that place not been accessible, and by accessible, we're not just talking about a ramp at the front door. For me personally, I need air conditioning. There's a bunch of things that's different to everybody, but they would have missed out on several $100s spend that the 10 of us put together. But additionally, it's not just the physical environment that makes a space inclusive. It's also things like staff attitude. So I know, Natalie, you and I have spoken before about pharmacies as one example. And when I go into a pharmacy, the assumption is, oh, you're just here for medication because that's all people with disabilities want. But no, I actually need shampoo, conditioner, makeup, hairbrushes, whatever. So again, it's coming back to that medical model of disability and how we view everybody with the disability through that lens. And I've been in enough boardrooms over the years, advertising agencies, businesses to know that while we can talk about disability is a nice thing to do for society, that is absolutely 100% right. But so often the decision makers and the people who are going to find the funds to make inclusive media and everything else, really, they're looking at the bottom of a profit and loss statement and they want to know what that return on investment is. So we need to be able to speak to them as well. It's not that we're not talking about what a great thing inclusive and diverse representation is. It's just that we need to have multiple conversations across the business.
Oh, look, absolutely. And I guess the point that both of you are making is that there is absolutely a commercial imperative. This is not a nice to have. This is not about being good humans. And look, I agree. I suffer from vestibular migraines only in the last kind of 12 months. And so when I talk about the retail experience, I talk about the retail curb cut effect, which is when we are overwhelmed with multiple layers of sensory input. My vestibular migraines are hormonally induced. So we have 50% of the human population, approximately, that are female who are going to be going through hormonal changes sometime between the ages of 40 and 60. I think the curb cut effect equivalent in retail is something we can't ignore. So thank you, both of you. It's been really interesting conversation. What I would like to ask as we wrap up, Lisa, is what's the call to action that you'd like to leave people listening to our conversation with today?
So many things. So if you are thinking of doing something inclusive, disability inclusive advertising is my little niche. So if we're talking about just inclusive advertising, Nothing About Us Without Us include people with disabilities from the start of production. So if you don't have someone with disabilities on the creative team, hire a consultant, run a focus group and include people with disabilities in your market research. Also look at inclusion holistically. So dumping one advertisement every 4 years when the Paralympic Games is on and then ignoring everything else, whether it's other years or not having an inclusive retail space, our website that's inclusive social media, making that accessible. That's not holistic inclusion. So, of course, we would love everyone to do everything. Realistically, we need to focus on, or perhaps brands need to focus on just one thing at once. So at least start. Don't be proactive. Don't wait for your competitors to do it first. Jump in there and have a start. And if you are worried about it or don't want to get it wrong or afraid of doing the wrong thing and the wrong thing, get people like Inclusively Made and Paul on board to hold your hand, because it can be terrifying in terms of how do I say it? What do I say? There are some great resources out there. Media Diversity Australia produced a handbook for journalists, advertisers and marketers in terms of how to interview people with disabilities, what words to use and what to avoid. So, for example, saying Lisa is confined to a wheelchair and wheelchair bound is horrible, because even though people may think, oh, it's just semantics, it's just a few words, no big thing. Over time, that builds up. And I can speak from experience that when I acquired my disabilities, I was 24. When I was told I have to spend my life in a wheelchair, have one leg chopped off and a whole heap of other things, I was terrified because I had 24 years worth of media stereotypes in my head that told me people are confined to wheelchairs, all of these things. So those little words missing in advertising and media, they build up over time. And it turns out disability wasn't the pity party that it's always made out to be.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you. And Paul, same question to you. What's the call to action you want to leave people with out of today's conversation?
The call to action to me is very much in line with Lisa's. A lot of organisations say we want to be inclusive, but we want to get a few things right or do a few things better before we actually start the journey. And to Lisa's point, we just say, well, those things may or may not happen. Just start the journey now. At some point in time, a disability or / inclusion will impact everyone. So I always equate it like if you're a parent with a pram, the long way around as far as accessing lifts and ramps and all those types of things. And also too, when you get older, 65+, generally your hearing, sight and mobility is impacted. So at some point in time, we interact in that disability space. And so the call to action is don't think it's just a 20% thing. Think of inclusion as a whole of life thing and think about what you can do within your respective organisation to ensure that representation spans whole of life, is inclusive, support that social model about identifying and removing barriers and not focusing on the disability being the barrier, and then ensuring that you've got dignified outcomes. Dignity is a fundamental part of accessibility inclusion and I think should always be held up as a main pillar.
Amazing way to end our conversation. So I wanted to thank you both again for bringing so much humanity to what we've talked about today. And I wish you both so much ongoing success in your advocacy. You're both doing amazing things. I've learned a lot out of today and I've learned a lot from having spoken to both of you previously. So best of luck and thank you again for sharing so openly today.
Thanks, Natalie. Great to be here and congratulations on the work that you're doing. Inclusive Change is just really doing some fabulous things in the retail space.
Thank you both again. And best of luck as you continue your advocacy and the amazing work that you're doing. If you found value in today's chat, the best way to support the podcast is to share it with a colleague. Make sure you hit follow or subscribe wherever you're listening. And I'm always eager to hear your takeaways. So do drop me a DM on Instagram at Inclusive Change or send me an email. All the links to connect with me and to learn more about today's guests are waiting for you in the episode description. Thanks again for being here and I'll catch you next time.